important enough. The narrative about the poorest villages in this country, for example, is the fact that there is no electricity, there is no drinking water, there is no sanitation, there are no hospitals, dispensaries. That's something that all of us know. But I sat there in one of these villages for about 8 hours. My uncle used to be the chairperson of NABARD, and he said, if you have to donate solar lamps, go to this one particular district, Vidarbh, near Nagpur. He said some of the poorest villages in the country are there. So I was sitting there, with 65 solar lamps that I was donating, and there is no village. You walk in there and say, where is the village? Because it's just red, rocky, inhospitable soil, and then with sticks of bamboo and hessian, there are some sort of fairly hesitant little dwellings in 2 lines. And the shop in the village is a shop with 3 lozenges, 1 packet of potato chips, 1 packet of some homegrown thing, and that's it. And there's one borewell, the other borewell broke in 63, hasn't been repaired since. No electricity, and what they grow is the size of this stage. They grow some dal, which is eaten up by the animals. So I'm sitting after having had lunch, which was 1 bhakri, which I wondered how they had made. Where they had got it from. She cooked it for me, one of the ladies in the village, and some dal. And I'm sitting there and I'm thinking, this is the narrative that we all know. This is that dark tunnel, the bottom 100 million people who are destined to be confined, just to be forgotten. And I said, they will just die, perish. And then at about 6 o'clock in the evening, when these solar lamps came on for the first time in their lives, and they had light, they sat and they wondered what to do with their time, because they couldn't afford kerosene for lamps. So they sat around, and then one of the women began to sing. Nobody told her, "Acha, aap kuch gana jante ho, please gao." Nobody said a thing. She just began to sing, tuneless, not decipherable, in a language I didn't understand. And she just began to sing, and 3 or 4 others joined in. And as they began to sing, I was saying, why are they happy? They said, because they can make fresh food now, for the second time in the day. And then one of them idly began to oil and plait her daughter's hair. And so the singing was going on, and a few of them were oiling and plaiting their daughter's hair. And that's when I realized that this is not what we hear. That they will not go gently into that night. You can do what you want. No water, no electricity, no food, no nothing. And they will still have the emotional nourishment within their souls to sing a song, to plait their daughter's hair. And in that tensile spirit, I learned something. That dominant narrative was just, we couldn't hear anything else, because that was the thing that crowded everything else out. And the last example I'd like to give out of all the experiences I've had is, and some stories, and this is Bombay, are just drowned out by the noise. There's too much noise around, you don't hear it. If it ever comes out, you don't hear it. So there's Zubin Mehta, who has a foundation named after his father, Melli Mehta Music Foundation. And I've worked with them. And I didn't know, I don't know whether any of you know, that there are slum children in Bombay learning Western classical music on the violin. And they made a trip to Japan. And they played with Japanese. A violin cost $3 million. The bow of a violin cost between $750,000 to $1 million. And these kids have been given the violin, and they're playing Western classical music. It doesn't fit comfortably. There are many problems in that image. But it exists. It's there. And so these kids are in Japan, and they're playing with Japanese violinists. And it's a moment to actually consider and say, that makes the tapestry of what we are. So it's these 4 examples and the 4 reasons why I believe that we don't ever, this is why our stories get lost in transition.
Right. So
sorry, it's a long answer.
He gave us some wonderful, thoughts on how narratives are lost. And I have a couple of other ways, in which I would want Rahul's and Aamir's thoughts in which we feel that narratives could be lost. But before that, I also want Aamir to, share some of his experiences and some of the truths which might be uncomfortable for all of us sitting out here about Kashmir, but I would want you to share them with us today.
Oh yeah, as far as narratives being lost is concerned, there are a lot of narratives which are there, but are sort of, like Rahul said, are sort of drowned out. But there are also narratives that are uh, pushed out by design. And again, coming back to my experience in Kashmir, and specifically Kashmir, for example, because it's uncomfortable, and because the state is such a dominant force in Kashmir that even in a functioning democracy like India, where your news media is supposed to be independent, when it comes to Kashmir, the narrative that comes out of Kashmir that you listen to is so filtered and so manipulated. And I'll give you a very concrete example. In 2010, when the street protests were happening in Kashmir, in which about more than 100 people died, most of them were teenagers, or the youngest one was a 9-year-old boy. In the midst of those protests, which lasted about 4 months, the whole summer, one day, this whole idea of these stone pelters being sponsored, basically being paid goons, came up, and then was actually bandied about in every news channel. And the top anchor from each channel at the same time, at prime time news, was actually coming up with this whole news, which was normally they just boast about the fact that this is an exclusive, but everyone had the same news. And the news was a clip of a phone conversation between two middle-aged Kashmiri men. And the translation, I don't know who did the translation, was completely the opposite, and was it was like they had deciphered some kind of a code, because this was just two middle-aged Kashmiri men, and this is I'm going to translate it for you because I remember it so clearly. One guy is telling the other one, "So what's happening in your neighborhood?" "Ah, the same old, same old. Some people throwing stones." "Really?" "Oh, yeah, but what do you have to worry about? You're a government servant. You get your salary. What are you cribbing about?" This is the conversation. And then the word salary, the moment the word salary comes in, all the anchors at that very point say salary is code for money changing hands. Money changing hands, money changing hands. This was prime time news, independent media giving you a picture of what was happening. Whereas the fact was that even the separatist leaders had no control over these protests. That supposedly the most hardcore, the most, stubborn of them all, Saeed Shah Gilani, was shouted out when he tried to address the public and uttered the word Pakistan in that speech, and he was shouted out. He was removed from the stage. It was so spontaneous. So this is one example of a narrative being actually twisted. I mean, spin. I mean, as far as I am concerned, I would never ever believe what the state tells you. Never. Because I think the foundations of the modern state are basically, they're based on lies. You just have to spin every story. You just have to keep spinning every story, and it cannot be the truth if you keep spinning it.
Right. So, when you bring up the state, that brings me to the question of perspectives, and which even the title of the book suggests is what the Jaguar knows we don't know. It's about the other perspective. So, if we look at things from a relativistic point of view, different perspectives, different contexts, everything could be true, right? So there's nothing absolute about truth. So maybe in the state's perspective, something is correct, or maybe in my Kashmir truth can be different from Aamir's Kashmir truth, or your Andaman truth could be different from the tribal leaders' truth. So, but then, But the whole idea is, do we oppose this relativistic point of view? But don't you think that would lead philosophical research to kind of lose itself in, in a kind of skepticism which doesn't lead anywhere? So how do you choose your narratives, Rahul? What is your criteria for choosing the truth, or for choosing the causes that you want to choose? How do you choose your truth?
I think there are some non-negotiables. Compassion, non-violence, love, the ability to evolve to a more happy and peaceful place. I think these are non-negotiables. I mean, if something goes against, I never found it difficult. The rest, I don't bother about the rest of the stuff. You can make love backwards, forwards. What is it? I mean, really, it's the rest is just noise. I've never had a problem. I mean, of course, never say never, but at the really fundamental issues, and I'm happy to change those stands. As I said, it's a daily process to examine who you are, and if you've changed, accept it. That in itself is very humiliating, perhaps, to yourself that, oh, I stood for this, I don't. But if you don't do that, there's just no point. There really is no point.
Aamir, would you like to add something to that?
No, not really.
All right, fine. So let me just, let's look at, another thing that I wanted Joanna to answer, but I could ask both of you this, and because Aamir was also speaking about, how his film was shot on celluloid, and it would perhaps be the last film that he would be shooting on celluloid. I wanted to ask this to Joanna because she had written about working in an office which was so antiquated. It had no computers, it only had typewriters, and everything was recorded in physical files and folders. But that may seem very impractical. But looking at the romp of technology, the information highway that we're talking about, that every 6 months technology changes. We had video cassettes, and then we had CDs, and then we had DVDs, and now there is Blu-ray discs, and no more, I don't know what, so on and so forth. And with each step, we lose so much material because I can no longer play films which were available on video cassette, and they're no longer available on CDs or DVDs. So all of us have, lost our personal archives many times over, every 6 months maybe. So that is also a loss of narrative, and I'd like you to share some thoughts. Aamir, if you could start with, your experience with your film, and then this loss of information because of technology.
Yes, with the change of technology, I mean, it is since my film was shot on celluloid and I have a 35 prints, this idea of just this thing decaying in front of my eyes, because especially in India, film preservation is the last thing on anybody's mind. So this very real fear of this, print actually catching fungus, just because to preserve it, you need to have like, a facility with temperature control and stuff like that. And at the same time, I got, a film festival in Japan, in Fukuoka, who paid for a fresh print and actually asked for my film to be preserved in Japan. So this, this idea of preserving or not losing something of some value, I guess, I don't know if it's a cultural thing. We claim to be, very cinema-friendly and, people, and influenced by cinema so much, but it just doesn't seem to translate when it comes to this sort of preservation. And this change of technology, for me, more than the loss of narrative, because I was just thinking about when you were talking about it, while this change has happened, a couple of friends of mine have actually revived an old storytelling art form of Dastan Goi at the same time. So, there is some hope. I mean, at the end of the day, yes, there is new technology coming in, which is probably making more and more. My only problem with the death of film and digital coming in is with the aesthetic. Is somehow digital, even though you keep saying it's 4K and it's 5K and it's as good as film, it just doesn't seem, high definition image is not as close to life or reality as film was. So my thing was only about the aesthetic. Yeah.
Rahul, what's your take on technology and its role?
Well, I actually totally disagree with you. I think I'm not going to discuss form. Cinema will go, digital will come in. Dastan Goi, if it dies today in the way it's being done, will be done in some other way. I think today, in fact, we have nothing lost. It's ridiculous. Everything you said is on the net. Some embarrassing photograph from childhood now, if there's a child who's 18 years old, is frozen and everyone can see it forever. Try taking your name and your image off the internet. You'll spend your whole life doing it. You won't succeed. Everything from the time when you're a toddler and your parents have recorded you on the Sony Handycam, everything is recorded. It's just an incredible amount of data that's being recorded and not lost at all. All of it has been kept. I can't think of a single thing that we don't, unless we knowingly delete. There's not a single thing that we need lose. And that is the wonderful thing about today's technologies. But there are no narratives being lost. What it does do, it just increases the amount of noise or the amount of clutter from which to